Hey, what's up? It's Ben Greenfield. We are on a roll this week. In the last episode, we talked about what many would consider to be fringe alternative medicine. Well, in today's episode, we'll get even more fringe. We're going to chat with my friend and sound healer who I went down to see in Sedona, Arizona, Porangui. You're going to love him. He's pretty cool. And if you decide to go to Sedona, you may have remembered that I interviewed this other healer named Anahata down there. Go see Anahata and Porangui. That's what I did. I went to Sedona and I saw them both in one fell swoop. And I went to this amazing restaurant that they have down there called Chocolatry. So there's three things for you to do if you decide to go to Sedona. Buy yourself a plane ticket. Go see this cat. Especially after you listen to this interview, I think you're going to want to. This podcast is brought to you by the brand new university that I have launched. It's called Kion U. It is everything that you would need to become the most qualified professional on the face of the planet. If you're a physical therapist, medical professional, physician, health coach, nutritionist, personal trainer, chiropractic doc, you name it. What I've done is I have taken every shred of knowledge up inside my head, everything I've gained from 10 years of running this podcast and talking to some of the top experts in the world, and I've put all the information together into one systematized curriculum that you go through and you learn everything there is to know. And then the icing on the cake is I add all your business tips, blogging tips, podcasting tips, content creation. I'm bringing in guest experts from around the world. For example, BJ Fogg, a Stanford research and world-renowned expert in behavior design. He's going to be joining us this month to teach you how to affect lasting behavior change. You don't have a bunch of knowledge rolling around up inside your head that you can't actually get results from your clients or your patients with. I have taken into consideration every last detail in the past 2 years that I've spent designing this curriculum and putting together this university. And so if you're a health or a fitness professional and you want to get in on this very rare chance to create an amazing career for yourself, essentially do what I do. I mean, that's the idea is I am creating this university that will allow other people to do exactly what I do in terms of educating the world and in terms of really affecting positive change and creating or empowering people to really create for themselves the ultimate human machine. Go to getkion.com/coach. That's getkion, getkion.com/coach. We're only accepting a limited number of students into Kion U. The time to sign up is running out pretty quickly here. So sign up while you still can. You can become a charter member of Kion U. This podcast is also brought to you by Four Sigmatic. I was actually just hanging out with my friend and Finnish mushroom hunter Taro. We were in Arizona together. We were at this resort, and I went on a couple of hikes with Taro, and I'm just incredibly impressed when I meet up with an entrepreneur or an owner of a company who actually is freaking passionate about their product. He filled me in for like a full hour of hiking on all these mushroom alkaloids, mushroom facts, and information about shrooms that were blowing my mind. Not only that, he was wearing mushroom pajama pants while we were hiking. He's that into mushrooms. And he studies the heck out of them, and he makes these amazing dual-extracted, extremely potent mushroom blends for sleep, for immune system, for libido, for recovery, for detoxification, you name it. Now, there's a lot on his website. But what I would recommend, if you just want to get everything in one fell swoop and you're like me and you just want to shotgun the best of his best, get their 10 mushroom blend. He calls it the daily dose of superhero. 10 mushroom blend. This is over at Four Sigmatic's website. You just go to foursigmatic.com/Ben Greenfield. That's foursigmatic.com/Ben Greenfield. And you'll automatically get in on all the goodness that is Four Sigmatic. And I recommend you start off with their 10 mushroom blend, baby. All right, let's go talk to Porangui. In this episode of the Ben Greenfield Fitness Show,
I was never quite Brazilian enough to be Brazilian. I was never quite Mexican enough to be Mexican, or American enough to be American. So it was like, that's my role in this world, is someone that's a bridger.
He's an expert in human performance and nutrition. voted America's top personal trainer and one of the globe's most influential people in health and fitness. His show provides you with everything you need to optimize physical and mental performance. He is Ben Greenfield.
Power, speed, mobility, balance. Whatever it is for you, that's the natural movement. Get out there. When you look at all the studies done, studies that have shown the greatest efficacy.
All the information you need in one place, right here, right now, on the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast.
Hey folks, it's Ben Greenfield here, and a couple months ago I was in Sedona, Arizona, where I happened upon this gentleman who I was introduced to by a former podcast guest and great guy, Aubrey Marcus. And Aubrey told me I had to go see this guy, Porangi, who does sound healing there in Sedona. And so I showed up at his place, and he proceeded to lay me on this special table and blast my body with everything from like a didgeridoo to a gong to a flute, and this was all blended with deep tissue massage work and this really immersive musical and sound healing experience that was unlike anything I've ever really undergone. So I had to get Porangi on the show to share this with you, and this guy's fascinating. He blends indigenous medicine practices from Brazil and Mexico and the southwestern U.S. He's a licensed massage therapist. He studied at Duke University in integrative health. He's also an accomplished musician. He has these amazing soundtracks. You know, I mentioned Aubrey a couple of minutes ago, and he did the soundtrack for an ayahuasca film that Aubrey helped to produce, and has amazing music. He at this time that we're recording this, I believe, is down at South by Southwest in Austin, where he's doing a concert down there. But from crystal and metal tuning forks to Tibetan prayer bowls and crystal bowls, didgeridoos, ton of different therapies. What I experienced with Porangi was pretty amazing. So I had to get him on the show to chat with you guys about how this stuff works, how sound healing works, and what exactly he does is so different and unique. So Porangi, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm so curious about your history and how you learned these things and wove them together. You know, how you have brought together Brazilian and Mexican and southwestern U.S. therapies and developed this whole healing method. So can you tell me about where this journey began?
Yeah, so it's been quite a journey. I think it's still, of course, ongoing. It never stops. I definitely claim the masterful student rather than masterful, teacher here. Just always learning, and it kind of goes all the way back to my roots, where I was born in Brazil. My father is from Mexico, and my mother's Brasileira. She's Brazilian, and they both were musical people and artists in their own right. And my mother also is a healer of sorts, and my grandmother, my father's mother, also was a healer, what they call sobadora, which is one who lays on the hands. And so, it's kind of been in my lineage to work with the healing arts. And from an early age, I knew, as much as I knew that music was part of my path, I also knew that healing was part of my path. And I thought, of course, I was going to be a medical doctor, and coming from a, pretty relatively poor family, if you will, by Western standards, but very rich in other ways. I spent a lot of my childhood kind of with that vision, that dream. And so I worked really hard, to kind of eventually get the scholarships together and the funding to be able to go to and get into Duke University, of course, and study, and was going for that pre-med track and started that whole line of study. And
oh, really?
Yeah,
that's funny. I did the same thing. I did a pre-med track and was going to be a doctor, but I did my internship at Duke, and
Oh, awesome.
spent a ton of time there at the orthopedic surgical facility, shadowing surgeons because I was very interested in sports medicine. So, yeah, I worked at Coach K's sports performance lab there at Duke.
Oh, yeah,
and spent the rest of my time in the medical library and with the orthopedic doc. So I'm very familiar with Durham.
Oh, so you know Durham. Yeah, totally. Well, no, exactly. So a lot of time in the Duke Medical Center, and I shadowed a lot of in the pediatric center and the intensive care unit, working with a lot of kids that were flown in, like burn, third-degree burn victims.
Yeah.
And, I loved it, and I also really quickly realized that it was more about the business than it was about healing, if that makes sense. And I kind of got disenchanted, to be honest, and I really had to look and do some really deep searching within myself. And fortunately, at the time, I was hanging out with these other students they were all in the neuroscience, and they were all part of a program called Program 2, which was something really unique to Duke. I think Princeton was the only university at the time that was doing this, where they basically you could design your own major and course of study if you could basically put it all together and then prove that it was academically rigorous enough, and you'd have to write an honors thesis, of course, and defend it to a board of doctors. And if they gave basically their stamp of approval, you could basically create your own major essentially. And that's essentially what I did. So the title of my major was Healing Through Music and Dance, Psychological and Cultural Perspectives. And yeah, I basically blended neuroscience, dance, and music departments, cultural anthropology, psych, and put it all into this really interesting line of study, which has honestly been my life. Has just continued doing that ever since.
So tell me about if you remember, I realize that sometimes when you've gone to college, it can be a far off memory. But what kind of courses do you take for something like that? Like what kind of things did you weave together when it came to the education?
Oh yeah, it's sure. Let me reaching back. I mean, it was a number of things. Of course, Duke didn't have anything even close to that specifically, so I had to really look at. Okay, for me, it was finding who are the mentors, who are the people who are, their research and their academic work and what they publish is going to be somewhere in this zone, if you will, at least in this general kind of noosphere of what I was looking for. And I tracked down a couple people who were really key. Louise Menkes, who was one of my main mentors, she was an ethnomusicologist at Duke from South Africa, and really amazing, doctor and incredible writer and researcher, and with a very musical background. And then I sought out Ava, who's an amazing African dance teacher and deep within a lot of the African roots of music and more folkloric ancestral music, and was teaching also for a long time at Duke, and pulled her. So the kind of dance department pulled in another professor who is a philosopher looking at kind of the aesthetics of, where our origin comes from and how do we talk about the aesthetics of art, and how is art and music, how can we look at that as far as defining that as is that a unique quality to humanity or not? Which is a really neat question in and of itself. We kind of think of ourselves as like, oh, we're so musical and we have dance and we have these arts and that's so unique. That's what makes us human. And yet, really, when we start looking at other beings on the earth, there's many forms of sound and movement that are intrinsic to how beings, manifest and how they relate to each other and how they communicate with each other. So it's a really cool piece. So kind of brought that in. And then the psych department, of course, pulling up kind of these whole pieces of, what we would call psychoacoustics, looking at what is the perception of sound and how does sound then, impact our physiology, our brain chemistry, all of these things. And that led me into the neurosci department, which is what I ended up doing a lot of my research in. And I thought when I switched out of pre-med and the medical program, I thought I was going to become a neuroscientist. And I actually started there. And I worked in a lab there. It's actually a Brazilian lab, Miguel Nicoleles. I don't know if you ever heard of him. His research was some of the early stuff. It's been on 60 Minutes, and he was pretty high profile for quite some time because he was the first person to develop microelectrode arrays, which are basically the implants that would be implanted into the motor cortex of rhesus monkeys, and essentially to control like robotic prostheses. And at the time when I was working there, so the lab was basically, we would have these monkeys do these operations on the monkeys, do the implants into their brains, and then these monkeys would basically operate these robotic arms prostheses that were at MIT across the internet, which was super revolutionary for the time. I mean, that was the stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like there's this guy I talked to on the podcast who discussed exoskeletons and the creation of almost like human robot bodysuits that could be worn and potentially even controlled with brainwaves or neuronal patterns. It was Ken Ford from the STEM Talk podcast, and it was very interesting what you can do. But this seems like a far cry from what I did when I was with you down there in Sedona. Like where did you go? Where do you go from there to develop this unique healing practice that you do now? Like how did this flesh itself out for you once you got to the point where you're actually practicing?
Yeah, well, it's actually a really interesting journey because it was in that lab. I was working in the lab, and I was working with the lead researcher and a dear friend of mine. His name was actually Siddhartha, of all names. He's another Brazilian, and we actually had met through capoeira, which is an Afro-Brazilian martial art. I don't know if you're familiar with capoeira, but
yeah, I've twisted myself up a few times attempting to learn that movement.
Yeah, it's an incredible movement practice, and actually, and I'll come back to it because it's a deep part of what my research ended up focusing on. But Siddhartha and I were basically in the lab one day, and we were doing this sleep memory study on these rats, and literally part of my job, of course, as the grunt, low level, was to sacrifice these rats, and we had like 3 minutes from the time you sacrifice them to scoop their brains out, deep freeze it cryogenically. And then my job was then to go back with this giant, very expensive meat cutter, essentially, and do these micrometer thin, sagittal cuts of the brain. And then we stain it and see what areas were active, during the study, which was a really horrific kind of process, actually, in the end of the day. And especially because I was vegetarian and I still am.
I was going to say, we just lost all our vegan listeners.
Yeah, exactly. Well, don't worry. I mean, basically, it converted me essentially because I thought I was going to be a neuroscientist. I go to him, Siddhartha, and I'm working this meat cutter thing, and I'm just like, okay, this is awful. I just want to help people. I know my calling is to heal and work with human beings, not to be, basically the giant Holocaust, silent Holocaust of science is, sacrificing all these animals that we kill in the name of the gods of science, And so Siddhartha, of course, turns to me and he's like, Porangi, you have two options. Either you go back to medical school, you suck it up, and you go through that. That's the only way you're going to work legally with humans, or you go get a massage license. And so I chose the latter. I basically went and I was like, all right, I definitely know that's not the path. So I went and got my bodywork license, as a massage therapist, basically to legally be able to, interact with humans and lay my hands on. But then I basically applied everything else that I've learned, and so much since then, of course, with numerous teachers, going back studying with my grandmother's teachers. So that's where, kind of more the traditional ways of healing and what I've learned from many different elders and indigenous teachers, as well as more conventional from, everything from myofascial work and kind of what we were doing there, neuromuscular work, and kind of looking at trigger points and these kind of techniques, and then basically my life has been all about bridging things. It's kind of, if you will, from the time I was a child, never really fitting into one place, growing up cross-culturally between, I was never quite Brazilian enough to be Brazilian. I was never quite Mexican enough to be Mexican, or American enough to be American. So it was like, that's my role in this world, is someone that's a bridger. I have a foot in multiple worlds. And that also applies, I think, to the energetic and spiritual, which has been a big part of my upbringing as well. And so it really informs, I think, the healing work, and what you experience is essentially the amalgamation of all of these practices and work. And of course, my passion with music, which at the same time, since Duke, I've been pretty much a professional musician. I haven't stopped, cultivating that and gathering sounds and instruments and stories from first peoples from around the world, indigenous people. I feel that the medicine is really there. Our ancestors had it basically all figured out before we kind of overlaid, the domination of science, which is, science is so beautiful in its truth and in the ways in which it's able to really measure and want to quantify. It's like a master of measuring the external world, right? And observing and measuring and quantifying the observable. However, the unobservable, the unseen world, which is actually the majority of the universe, and the most interesting, I would argue, part of the universe, it really doesn't know what to do. And so that's kind of where, again, being the cross-cultural bridger that I've, come to know myself as, it's really been my mission, is like, okay, how do we connect these dots? How do we reach into this world that is, really hard for a scientist, for instance, to go into, and make any sense of. And how do we bridge that into a way that people who don't know that or don't even know how to start to think about that can really start to access it? And what I found in truth, Ben, is that that really comes out of our direct experience. And so what you experienced on the table and through the session is really it. It's like it's the only way. Because I mean, I could try to explain it for days, but until you feel it, you really feel, oh, I feel a tangible, palpable difference in my being. It's really, you know what I mean? Because there's no hard study that we have still to date that says quantifiably, okay, this is doing this, this, and this, right?
Right. So when I think when we first got on the table, what you started off with was you were just having me do a special form of breathing. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is a couple months ago now. But tell me about that. Why you start with breathing and where the breath fits in? Because you've obviously strung together all these strange and fringe practices that you've collected from the four corners of the planet, and that I want to walk people through like how it actually works and why you choose what you chose. So tell me about the breath and why you start with the breath and how that actually works.
Okay, so the breath is a great place to start because it is in fact the first and last thing we ever do on this human walk, you know. So I feel it is the groundwork, if you will. The breath is basically it's life, that inhale, right? When we breathe in air, oxygenate the blood, when we help the metabolism, all of these processes, chemical processes that happen within the body to begin, we breathe in that life. And then in the pause in between, there's this moment, this still point, right? The pause between the breath, which I'll go into later. But then the exhale, of course, is the death. Right, we're releasing all those toxins. Everything's been metabolized. You know, it's literally coming out through the exhale, the release, the surrender, and this is so that's that life and death kind of process. And then you have this other pause, and so these two pause points are what I like to call it's the vacuum. It's like the tension or the motor, if you will, that kind of keeps this life force, this process or cyclical process or rhythmical process of life and death, constantly fluxing. It's the pump or the prana pump or the chi pump, if you want to talk about Chinese medicine or Vedic medicine, really looking at how this polarity moves our body. And in essence, you could call that the rebirth. So you really have this life, death, rebirth process happening in this micro level with each breath. And then, of course, you string those out across the span of a lifetime, and you essentially have this journey that is our life. So what I like to tell people, my clients, and I feel has been a mantra for myself is, you know, it's the first and last thing we're ever going to do is breathe. So why not master it? And I think that really, you know, it really sums it up. So there's so many practices and ways that the breath has been studied and mastered, if you will, by multiple cultures, you know, across the world, everywhere from Qigong, you know, all the way to, you know, to what's the brother, the Wim Hof, who does the whole cold plunges. Yeah, Iceman. So you have so many, you know, such a variety, of course, but we all have it. It's this common free medicine that everyone has access to, right? We all breathe, even when we're not thinking. Most of us don't think about it. And so the breath is really essential. Oh, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say was when you, I think what happened was you laid me down on the massage table and then you coached me through a specific breathing pattern, told me to continue that pattern the whole time that you were doing the work. Can you tell me a little bit about the pattern that you were coaching me on? Yeah,
so that's perfect. So basically the breath work that I've kind of found, you know, between all these various techniques, and there are many, and they each have their applications. What I found is one of the most powerful therapeutic breaths, and that's what I like to call it. Is one. It's very simple, and essentially it involves, you know, breathing in through the nose and exhaling out the mouth. And specifically targeting the diaphragm and breathing all the way down into the pit of our stomach. And really, it's something that's actually really challenging for most adult humans.
Well, see, I don't think it's challenging to do like one or two times. It's challenging to do when you're laying there on the table for like, you know, an hour or an hour. And I think I was there like an hour and a half. Like I almost got into this trance-like state trying to continue breathing into my diaphragm the whole time. You don't realize how difficult a move that is to do for a long period of time because you're so used to shallow chest breathing.
Right, exactly. And that's just it. The shallow chest breathing, and actually on the table is much easier than standing, in fact. So oftentimes, I'll explain the process. We'll do some kind of explanation, some coaching standing, and then that's applied laying down, which oftentimes is a little easier just because the pressure and the weight is a little easier when we're laid down. And in fact, when we sleep, we breathe this way. When we go into REM sleep, when we go into our deeper sleep and our active mind shuts off, it's actually the body's parasympathetic takes over nervous system, and we breathe from our diaphragm, not from our chest. And this chest breath, I really liken it to this. My theory is, this is my hypothesis, is that, human beings, when you look at a baby breathe, watch a young baby, they're breathing from their belly. Their belly goes up and down. Their chest is barely moving at all, in fact. You look at a dog, you look at a cat, you look at any animals that you have any contact with, animals breathe from their belly. They're breathing from their diaphragm constantly. You look at an adult human, and at most 9 out of 10 adult humans, and I'll tell you this out of working with thousands of people over my years as a therapist, everywhere from 80 plus years old down to teenager, adolescent, basically. This is about the time I think this really gets ingrained and patterned. We start breathing from this shallow breath. And what I believe it comes from, this is my hypothesis, is that we're on the playground as a little kid, and maybe we start crying, we fall down or whatever. And somebody else says, "Suck it up, crybaby." Or, "You're fat, suck it in. You're such a fatty kid." Whatever that is, some little thing happened, I'm sure, at some point where we told ourselves, suck it in and hold that breath. And it's not okay to be breathing from this connected place, which is actually our authority. This is, breathing down to our diaphragm gives us this power and strength. That's why when we get hit in the stomach and we're breathing from our chest, we get the wind knocked out of us. We literally we're not plugged into this core breath, which is actually 40% more capacity of our lungs. So we're actually asphyxiating ourselves in essence.
Yes. And for me, by the way, what happened with me was I was a bodybuilder. And so I got so used to sucking my abs in while on stage and breathing from the chest that I developed this really, really nice V taper in my abs. And I still, honestly, I have a really great midsection, really great looking midsection, but I also struggle with psoas issues and diaphragm issues and breathing issues because I trained myself to suck my stomach in, not just for the bodybuilding stage, but because as a almost as a young westernized male, I was raised with this idea that, you got to suck in your abs and stick your chest out and flare, look great for the girls, and that a relaxed posture in which your belly's kind of sticking out, as you might see in photos. You look through National Geographic, for example, you see photos of all these hunter-gatherer tribes and more indigenous or ancestral populations, and they kind of stand without this lordotic curve in the back and without the abs sucked in, and rather everything's just kind of in this relaxed posture where the abs are just kind of allowed to be pushed forward slightly, and they're not going to win any bodybuilding trophies for sure, but I guarantee they're deep belly breathing a lot more efficiently.
A lot more, and I'll argue that they have more oxygen in their blood as a result, and they're a little more activated. They're literally more in tune with their body awareness.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, which is, and the converse is also true. You mentioned that for the looks and kind of to track the women, but the converse is true for women. So many women, right, are sucking it in, pushing out their butt, and pushing out their breasts because that's what society wants. That's the image that we've been programmed to believe is beautiful, right? So it's a really deep societal, social level of patterning that we basically all ascribe to as adults, and it's really hard to deprogram from it. But it's one of the things that I found, without a doubt, in my healing work, it helps so many people. The moment they start getting more aware of this kind of breathing and connecting to the diaphragm, so much in a person's life changes. I've literally seen people's metabolism totally shift. I've seen underactive thyroid become normalized. Numerous things, not just more energy overall. As well as, and this is the whole piece that is kind of harder to quantify, but is the emotional states. So much of our emotional state, it comes in the belly. It's held down in our stomachs, right? And it's when we're disconnected from our stomach, in Chinese medicine, there's a point in our body called the dantian, which is, the seat of where the chi kind of emanates, that point, just two fingers below the belly button.
lower dantian. Well, there's the lower, the middle, and the upper, right?
Right, totally. So the lower dantian, specifically in this example, but connecting and breathing into that point, activating that chi and connecting to basically the energy field around us, right? It's like being able to move beyond ourselves. There's kind of this notion that, in our society, we're always running around and there's always more to do. We're all on our iPhones, or whatever, and constantly in this stress state, this fight or flight state. And we're not breathing while we do all this. And so it's like this idea that we're burning up all of our jing, our life essence, which is stored in the adrenals and the kidneys. And this notion that if we could open up and start to gain more awareness about our dantian, about our literally our breathing and our awareness in our breath, in every waking moment, there's going to be this whole ability to tap into the energy force around us, essentially not running on the battery pack, in our kidneys, on this jing and like running and exhausting our jing, life essence, but rather connecting to the infinite energy all around us, which is literally through the breath.
Yeah.
It is our chi pump, our prana pump, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, the simplest tactic I ever learned, this was after I met with you, is I was up at Paul Check's house, and he just showed me this simple kite string technique where, you tie a kite string right around the belly button, and it's like this cue, right? It's just a very simple cue in which you think consciously about expanding that kite string when you breathe. And there are now, special, and folks, if you're listening in, by the way, pipe in the comment section if you know, because I don't recall, but there's a few new devices out that are like, they're like Bluetooth generating devices that tie to your phone that let you know, you wear them around your waist. They let you know when you've stopped belly breathing, and cue you to breathe properly and track your breath work. And so, by the way, I mentioned leaving a comment. If you guys are listening in, go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/sound healing. That's bengreenfieldfitness.com/sound healing, and that's where the show notes are for Porangui, and I'm gonna put some of his music in there as well, so you can kind of see some of the tunes that he creates. I want to move forward to going past the breath and delve into some of the other things that you did. So you taught me how to breathe. You told me to breathe that way the whole time, this deep diaphragmatic breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. Then you laid me on the table. And what comes next? I mean, I know that you call this style, what do you call it, myorhythmic technique?
Yeah, in myorhythmic release, myorhythmic technique, I've kind of been, it's a terminology that I've been playing with, just in so much as, eventually my goal one day, I have this dream that I'm going to eventually have time to stop what I'm doing. And I've been focusing a lot on my music right now. In large part because, through my healing practice, I can reach one-on-one, but it's really hard to reach many people with the same amount of time. And just given the amount of time in our lives, I've been feeling called to I can reach a lot of people through my music, at once, through performing and through recording. And so that's kind of been my focus currently. But I know that one day I'm going to go back and basically write a book and teach what I do. And so in that vein, I started, kind of coining, like, what's the terminology? What would I call this? So that's where the myorhythmic release came from. And essentially, it's kind of like the myofascial work, the myofascial release. And there's a lot of different terminologies for that. I kind of hate terms that, like that. They kind of get convoluted and it's just a branding thing. But at the core, what we're talking about is exactly the rhythmic for me, or rhythm. It has to do with, of course, time and the mastery of time, and also cycles. And the way cycles work on various, levels within us, microcycles to the macro. And essentially, breathing is one of those cycles that we're doing in this work. It's very fundamental. So that's why we start there. That's the groundwork. And then, of course, the other cycles being also your circulatory cycle, lymphatic cycle, also the cycle of the cerebral spinal fluid that's also moving through you. And then also the energy and the meridians, and, tuning into what the chi or the prana and how that's moving through your body. So all of these are different levels of cycles that I'm tuning into, rhythms. And then there's, of course, vibration, which I'll get into. I'm sure we'll talk further about that. But what I want to talk about next, essentially in the session, is that I tune into you. And I start doing a technique of, some people would call it rocking. Traeger is a technique, a formalized technique that, by Traeger, who, basically developed a whole school around just rocking and moving bodies and shaking the body. But essentially, it's a very ancient art, right? Rocking, shaking. You look at a dog, when you pet them and they're trying to shake off whatever that energy is, you can see they're very aware of it. Or a bird hits a window and falls, you think it's dead, and then I've watched this bird just hop up, but suddenly shake off whatever the trauma was, and then fly again. And so it's a really interesting phenomenon, this rocking, shaking. So what I do is then use that essentially to rock your body and to start to essentially recalibrate your nervous system by engaging all your proprioception and your muscle spindles in your body as they start to feel this rocking motion. There's kind of the muscles kind of going back and forth, expanding, contracting, and there's this certain level of tension, baseline tension that's in your body. And what I can do is by doing this, it's almost like sonar. I'm pinging the vibration from your feet up to your head, and I'm watching where there's any places where I don't see vibration, like where I don't see movement. So where there's a holding, where there might be some kind of trauma, some kind of scarring. And literally, it's a way that I can quickly do a diagnosis of the whole body.
Wait, back it up just a second. How are you getting the body to shake? I forget this part.
Yeah, so there's different ways of doing it. I might start in any part of the body, but one of my favorites is just to start at the feet, because it's usually often a not so guarded place, especially if someone's very traumatized. So I'll go to the feet. And I don't know if you remember this, but I'll essentially go to the feet. I'll lift your legs. I'll just create a little traction. And then I'll slowly start to rock from left to right. Yeah. And so this rocking, literally, your body at first, you're kind of like, it's rigid. It's like it's kind of almost resists. It's like, no. And then all of a sudden the body starts to let go and realize, oh no, this is safe. It's okay. And little by little, everything starts moving, everything. And I find essentially what the frequency is of your body, and your body is unique, right? Each body is. And so there's a certain level of, a really attunement and tuning into, what that is. And it's kind of one of those things where it's a touch. I don't know that I could explain it. It's one of those things that you have to experience it and then practice. But essentially what I do is as I send a wave from your feet, it's basically, think of an oscillator. Your body is essentially like a band. Or think of a battle rope, if you will, tied off at the top, right? And I'm whipping the battle rope from the bottom, and I'm trying to see at what frequency of the battle rope do I get the whole thing to send a wave all the way up to the top of your head and all the way back down to the feet, right? And so, and essentially, then I can diagnose where, and also from either your left or your right, where you're holding and where things are stuck or where things are moving, maybe too much. Maybe so whatever that is, that's how I do an assessment that way. And it also at the same time, and I love this, for me, it's like, I'm trying to do so many levels of things in such a short amount of time in a session. So I'm also, as I'm sending this wave up and down, making my assessment, I'm also actually helping your nervous system calm down, helping you drop in a little deeper, because I want to get you as quickly as possible out of your sympathetic and into your parasympathetic nervous system, and really just get you to basically drop in and surrender all the armor. Because the quicker I can get you to let go of your armor and whatever defenses are there, whether they be conscious or subconscious, the deeper the work and the further we can get.
Right. Okay. So basically, you're shaking the body, and you're just kind of feeling what exactly are you feeling for when you shake?
Yeah, so it's essentially, the shaking is vibration, right? And that's why I go back to the vibrational medicine of what this is. And so we're vibrating you, I'm shaking you, I'm rocking you, and I'm looking for where there is a lack of movement. In other words, where's the body not shaking back? Because the idea is, and this is, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but like a tuning fork, okay?
Okay.
When you strike the tuning fork will resonate, it'll vibrate, right? And it vibrates at whatever the metal, whatever its shape is, it'll vibrate in that way. And by the same nature, you grab an identical tuning fork, the exact same, let's say, created tuning fork with the same mass and the same shape, and you strike it, and it will also vibrate pretty much identically. And you hit them one, and you place it near the other, and it will vibrate sympathetically, right? Which is this really interesting phenomenon known as sympathetic resonance. And so just to speak to that, so if I were to put something, let's say a mass, like the poster tacky stuff you put wall, or that like gummy stuff or a piece of gum. I stick a piece of gum on that tuning fork, let's say on the left side of it, and I strike it. Now, it's not going to resonate the same way. Literally, that side will have more mass, more inertia, more density, and that density is going to throw off how the tuning fork resonates as a symmetrical object. And conversely, the sympathetic resonance with that other tuning fork, they're now in a different resonance. They're not going to actually vibrate each other like they would before. And so, and I'll get to that later. I'll come back to that. But the point here being, as I'm oscillating your body and we're seeing where things get stuck, where are things not moving, where's the tissue not responding. And basically that tells me, okay, we have something going on there. That's going to be one of my first places I want to look. And so that's kind of, that's the assessment part. And then again, I'm tracking your breath too. So are you struggling with the diaphragm breathing, or is it getting easier for you? I'm watching your nostrils. The moment I see your left nostril get a little bit more dilated, that's telling me actually you're going to parasympathetic nervous. You're dropping in a little bit
when it
deeper.
Gets more
so
dilated,
I'm watching
when the nostril gets larger and you can tell nasal breathing is being enhanced. That's when someone's going into parasympathetic breathing patterns.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm watching for all that, because in the beginning you're thinking about it, like you said, you're really like, okay, I'm trying to do what he told me, and so it's this idea, and I try to encourage also just relaxing into it, let it become more automatic as much as possible. And I always say this, and I don't know if you remember. If you forget, it's okay. I'll remind you if we get to something where I need you to take a breath. And that's really important because it inevitably, my goal isn't for you to really think about the breathing the whole session. It's just to get into understanding that that's where we're at. That's what we're working on, and let go of that now. Like kind of empty your mind as much as you can.
Hey, I want to interrupt today's show to talk to you about nicotinamide riboside. NR. NR is one of the most potent ways to enhance your mitochondrial health, and I've been using it as kind of a fringe longevity tactic for a while now. You may have heard of nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Yeah, there's another big multisyllabic word for you. And I even have done an entire podcast on this anti-aging molecule that's kind of like the new darling of the mitochondrial health and anti-aging community, because as you age, you lose up to about 50% of your NAD levels, and as soon as that drops, your cells can't produce the energy that they need to maintain your health, or to fight inflammation, or to maximize your day to be productive, or to allow you to keep working out at the level that you want to, or to fight jet lag, which is incredibly important for. Well, there's one supplement that's been clinically proven to raise NAD levels. It's called nicotinamide riboside, NR. It's also known as, it's a little bit easier to spit out, and it's the key ingredient in True Niagen. True Niagen. So True Niagen is something that you just take a few capsules of each morning to restore your body's natural balance of NAD every time you take it. They recently had a study published in UC Boulder in which they talked about its potential to improve blood pressure and to improve cardiovascular health. And if you chronically supplement with it, it keeps your NAD levels raised all year long. So it's a pretty beautiful and handy little supplement called True Niagen, NR. It's nicotinamide riboside. You find it in this True Niagen stuff, and you can find out more. You just go to trueniagen.com. That's TRUNIAGEN, trueniagen.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Daily Harvest. Now, I have a little freezer full of this stuff from Daily Harvest upstairs. I'm at my home office right now. And what they do is they take these perfectly portioned cups of frozen organic superfoods and fresh fruits and organic vegetables, and they put it all into this little cup, and then they send it straight to your door. And we're talking like matcha lattes with mint and banana cacao smoothies, and you just dump it all into a blender, or if you're doing one of their savory meals, you just put it into a skillet, and you can have an easy, delicious, plant-based food meal ready in as little as 30 seconds. My kids have been using this before they go to school in the morning, and they simply dump it out into the blender or into the cast iron skillet, and it's just ready to go. They've got smoothies, they've got savory harvest bowls, they've got soups, they've got superfood lattes, they've got overnight oats, everything. And you get your 3 cups of Daily Harvest free when you get that first box from Daily Harvest. To do so, you go to daily-harvest.com. It's daily-harvest.com, and you enter promo code BEN. That gives you your first 3 cups free in your first box of Daily Harvest. So daily-harvest.com and use promo code BEN. The one thing that this brings to mind is I don't know if you've heard of mouth taping before, but it's something that folks will do now to enhance parasympathetic nervous system activation while they sleep. And this sounds like a lot of stuff to put on your face before you go to bed. But I've tried this before. You tape your mouth. There are companies like 3M that make like a tape you can put over your mouth. Then you can put one of these nasal breathing strips that kind of open up the nasal passages. Like you see football players wearing or cyclists wearing. In races. That open up the nasal passages, and you can sleep like this to enhance parasympathetic nervous system activation while you sleep. I've had a few people try it. I've done it myself with the this ring on that I wear to track sleep, and it actually does enhance deep sleep a little bit. It increases your deep sleep percentage, but I don't like to do it that much because I with the mouth tape on. My wife and I like to chat before we fall asleep at night, right? And so I've tried this before, and I we'll sometimes just like fall asleep as we're talking, right? And then we'll just kind of fade off and go to sleep, and I can't do that with the mouth tape on. So it's not a technique that works too well for me. But I suppose if you're single or you don't like to chat before you go to bed at night, it could be something to look into. Okay, so yeah, exactly. The mouth tape trick works sometimes, but it could also destroy your marriage. So this whole kind of like pre-work pattern that you're doing, you're shaking, you're feeling out the body, teaching the breathing, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, and is that after that, is that when you get into the sound stuff?
Yeah, well, kind of the sound stuff is woven throughout, and I don't know if if you notice, but I also work with different music, and my table is a sound table, which all of this, everything that I do can be done without the sound table. The sound table is like
you got to describe this to people, by the way. The sound table.
Yeah, the sound table is really a remarkable device. It's essentially this one's made by a guy in Colorado. It's custom made, and it's made with transducers, multiple different transducers, which are essentially, put simply, it's like taking the magnet out of a speaker. Instead of having the cone of the speaker, it's just the magnet, so which vibrates the cone, and that's what moves the air that we hear, the sound. In this case, we're essentially taking those transducers, and these are special ones, not just any speaker transducer, but they're made to recreate frequencies from 80 hertz and below. And there's multiple ones of this style. And then there's a full range transducer, which is made to create everything up to 20,000 hertz and down to 20 hertz. And so that's the full range of, what most humans can perceive, although not very few people can actually perceive that full range. So this essentially is then mounted into this table in a golden mean ratio. And the guy who built it, he's really into sacred geometry and, really feels that helps enhance this. And I don't know one way or the other. I just know it does work phenomenally well. So I trust that. But he essentially mounts that. And what it does in effect is turn the entire table into a vibrating platform or a speaker, if you will. And then it's really more felt than heard. So when your body is coupled with it, the weight of your body pressing down into the table, then you basically become part of that resonator. And so you are essentially the speaker as well. So your body is also resonating. And so essentially it's a way of getting frequencies into the body directly and kind of bypassing the auditory, that you're hearing your ears. And so you can actually hear it more, feel it rather than hear it. I combine it with
you feel it kind of go through your whole body. I have this this pillow. It's made by I think it's a company. It's called Humu or something like that. I found them in Finland, and it's similar to that. It's like a pillow. You lay your head on it, transmits sound through the pillow, and you can just kind of feel the sound going through your whole body, almost like these underwater MP3 players that conduct sound through the bones in your skull. But basically, your entire bed does that through the whole body.
Yeah. Exactly. The table does that. And so it's really phenomenal tool. And now another great example for listeners out there, if you have a guitar, let's say at your house or something like that, it's kind of a weird thing to do, but bite the end of the guitar, like the neck of the guitar at the very top of it, just put your teeth gently on it. And so you'll basically create this, this point of contact between your cranial bone, your maxilla and your mandible. and essentially then strum the guitar. And literally, it will sound like someone put the guitar in your head. And it's a pretty neat way to just kind of feel what we're talking about. But that's essentially that.
To have to try this and get strange looks from my family as I
totally
eat my
yeah.
guitar. I may start with my ukulele. It might fit in my mouth a little better.
Totally. Yeah. And have someone play it. Like you could play it, just kind of strum it or hold a chord and just kind of play it. And it's the really amazing experience. And what that is, that conductivity of that direct contact. And so you're essentially getting the sound directly into your being and bypassing, everything that your eardrums have to go through.
Okay.
So essentially, we're doing that with the table, and then what that's hooked up to is to various instruments that I work with, which you were mentioning earlier. Everything from the didgeridoo, which to Tibetan prayer bowls, and I work with these tools primarily because they are very ancient. They're very primordial, and I have a newer crystal bowl, if you will. But honestly, I love it for certain things, but I really feel, and we can talk about this later, but I really feel working with the more ancient indigenous instruments, there's just more juju there.
It feels less synthetic, honestly. And
Yeah.
I mean, the bowls are cool, but like the didgeridoo is pretty epic. And I want to get into that in a second. Some of these, I think you call them, what do you call them? Cymatic sound therapy?
Somatic sound therapy is kind of a way to describe the whole thing. So,
Okay.
Because cymatics, right, is basically it's a coin that was termed by Jan Hensing, who's he's a scientist, a researcher from, I believe it was Switzerland, or Sweden, Switzerland, I believe, is Swiss. And essentially he came up in the 60s and with this whole technique, he started this area of study, which was then termed a whole field called cymatics, Cymatics, which was basically looking at the way that sound would basically create structure in the physical realm. And actually he created some really neat experiments, and they're documented pretty well. So you can YouTube cymatics and just look at some of the videos online. And there's some old black and white videos that were from his scientific experiments that he basically come up with. And it's fascinating. Like he tried different mediums, like everything from liquids like water, and what happens if you basically send a vibration into the water, everything to like kind of different types of more viscous liquids. And activating those and basically resonating them, like I was talking about the tuning fork. Essentially at the tuning fork, you're striking the fork. The fork is then you're putting energy into this object, this physical medium, and then that begins to vibrate and resonate. And essentially, if you could slow that down or somehow see that or capture that, this is the phenomena of cymatics that we see. And what he showed, which is really neat, and I really recommend, and I actually have done this experiment at home. You can recreate it yourself. A simple way to do it is take a speaker, and this is, super do-it-yourself home style, but take your speaker, whatever it is, take the front off of it, like like the nylon that's on the front of it, and just get the cone if you can. Then put a plate that's, and I actually just took it, because I'm a drummer too. I have lots of drums in my house. I just put a big drum on top of it with a black, like a kick drum, and with a black, head on it, nylon head. But you could do this just taking like a thin plate of metal or something like that, like a sheet. Maybe it could be plexiglass. And then put salt, a bunch of just white salt. And for me, it works really nice if you have a black surface with the white salt on it, because you can see the patterns really well. And then essentially, I just hooked up the speaker to a sine wave generator. And you can just get those on the App Store or whatever on your phone, and start to do basically what would be a sweep of frequencies. So you can start down from 20 hertz, which you can't really hear. Most speakers can't reproduce 20. But as you start to go up from 20 up into like, say, 40, 50 to 100 hertz, you'll start really being able to hear that. 100 hertz is, say, where like a kick drum likes to hang out. So most music, we all hear the kick drum pretty well, but you usually feel the kick drum more than you hear it.
Right.
So same idea. So, and then you're going to go basically sweep it up, and you'll take your little app or whatever and filter all the way up to 20,000 hertz. Just kind of go through the full spectrum. And if you do this slowly enough, you'll literally watch the salt begin to vibrate, and it'll look like chaos at first. It'll just be like dancing around all over the place, a lot of salt on the floor. So, put a blanket down or whatever. But as you get going, you're going to find certain frequencies that all of a sudden will literally crystallize into a geometry until it looks like someone drew a mandala on this surface. with the salt. And it's like a standing wave. Like the salt will start to organize itself into these concentric circles and different kind of fractally looking geometry. And it's really amazing. And as you go higher with the frequency, the more complex of the shape will take. And literally, as you get high enough, like, and you can do this with actual notes, with pitches, like playing a keyboard, if you will, it will form these different geometries. And some of them, some frequencies will be a little bit more chaotic. It'll go chaos, for instance, all of a sudden. You keep sliding up, and next thing you know, it'll start to form into another geometry shape, more complex than the previous. And then you'll kind of find a certain frequency or a range of frequencies where it's like the sweet spot, where it really holds that shape.
This sounds kind of like Masaru Emoto's studies on how when you subject water, and I realize there's some controversy behind whether or not these studies were conducted with rigorous science, but you subject water to emotions or prayers or even specific frequencies, and depending on the quality of that frequency or the positivity of that emotion, they generate a specific 3D geometric shape.
Absolutely. And water is that's why it's such a great medium. And so Hans Jenny, if you look at, I think he has a book, there's a book out that I think either he published or someone published of his work that has a lot of imagery, like photos, stills of this geometry, because it's really beautiful. It's just breathtaking to actually look at.
What's his name?
Jans Henny. Let's see if I can I want to miss.
Okay, cool.
Sacrifice.
Yeah. While you're looking that up, what I want to hear about before we delve into how you use the didgeridoo and some of these singing bowls and these other devices is I'd love to hear your take on what's going on to human organs or human cells, like how much of a corollary we can draw there, or any science or any research you've seen, or what you hypothesize to be going on physiologically when the body gets exposed to these frequencies.
Yeah, it's gosh, that's kind of one of those areas where there's a lot of research. I think just really it's a juicy area, I feel, in my humble opinion, for more study. I don't think there's been nearly enough work in that area, but there has been work. And so it's really fascinating. So Hans Jenny, real quick, it is Hans Jenny, Jenny, and he was in fact Swiss.
Okay.
So yeah, Swiss medical doctor, and kind of got into this whole area. He's passed. He died in 1972. But if people just look it up. There's a lot of stuff online, and it's really beautiful stuff. And kind of it is very much like Dr. Emoto's work. It's cool that you brought it up. I mean, I know that he got a lot of slack, and there's a lot of questions around how rigorous his research was. However, I do think that there's a lot of direct experience that people can have. Just doing their own experiments with water and working with water. I mean, there's the field of homeopathy, which has been around for quite some time. And with, obviously, I think more than a statistical amount of evidence that shows that there's benefit to it. So many people, have seen benefit from homeopathy. It's been around for a long time. And I know that there's a lot of controversy, of course, around it. But I myself have seen a homeopath. I used to teach actually on a medical board. It was called Global Medicine Foundation. It was a foundation right after I left Duke that I worked with, and they were based in North Carolina there. And our job was to take basically leading experts in all these fields of holistic medicine, essentially everything from Ayurvedic medicine to homeopathy to body work and, basically, somatic work. They had internal medical doctors. They had people working with, all these mediums. And essentially our job was to take fourth-year medical school grads and give them like a 2-month program that would dose them with, okay, you've studied all this Western medicine. Now here's how the rest of the world heals human bodies and give them like a download. And so in this program, I met this amazing homeopath named Malcolm Smith, and he's up in Portland, incredible homeopath. And, he treated me, and it really shifted my whole life. Back when I was about 28 years old. So yeah, I can't say it enough. It was about 10 years ago. I really recommend people connect to water, because essentially we are water, right? We're water bags. And so it's like when you think about Emoto's work and you think about ourselves and that we are bodies of water, what we put into our body of water, including obviously physically, nutritionally, but also energetically, right? Or the thoughts that we think, when we ideate certain ways, we go down into self-destructive patterns, or we rise up into incredible manifestation patterns, right? Where we create beauty around us or we create destruction. And so I think there's so much corollary on so many levels, of course, with his work that, yeah, is it totally quantifiable? Again, kind of what I said in the beginning, it gets into that unseen world where I feel like don't throw out, the bathwater in this case with the baby.
Mm-hmm.
The bathwater has some knowledge in it.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you look at intracellular communication. And a previous podcast guest and a very smart triple board certified physician, Dr. Zach Bush, we get into this a little bit in the show, and you can go check that one out. I'll link to it in the show notes over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/sound healing. But intracellular communication based on photobiomodulation, or the conductance of light, is highly dependent on the hydration status of the human body. So in a way, the way that our cells communicate, it's dependent on our electrochemical gradient across the cell membranes, our hydration status, and specifically the quality of that hydration status from a mineral and an electrical standpoint, meaning that the type of water and the quality of the water that you actually drink, and then also your exposure to things like infrared, things like sunlight, et cetera. It's very interesting. Like sunlight, breath work, really good water. Those are keys to intracellular communication. We're often led to believe that it's all just nerves, right? And that's the way that the body communicates, but it goes far above and beyond that. I know we're kind of rabbit holing here, but I'll link to that interview with Zach Bush.
I think you hit it on the head, and actually it's a really nice segue into, the myofascial and the connective tissue of the body, which is a big part of the work that I do. As you said, it's like we're working with vibration on all these levels, right? So there's many levels to it. And so again, when we talk about the body itself and the connective tissue of the body, or the myofascia of the body, so myofascia is an amazing whole new kind of field, if you will. It's so ancient, of course, but Western science is just very recently starting to get turned onto it. There's actually, and I'm gonna have to look it up, and I'll send it to you. But there's a doctor very recently who's starting to do some research with another body worker by the name of Tom Myers, who's also an author. He wrote a book by the name of Anatomy Trains. And he was a student of Ida Rolf, who started the whole movement of Rolfing and that whole technique of structural integration. But I think there's so much wisdom in really potential to understand that we haven't even tapped into with myofascia. And this French doctor, anyways, recently he's been doing basically this dissection of live cadavers who are very recent, in being able to work on live specimens and to show, because most cadavers, of course, by the time they dissect it, the fascia has already lost all the hydration. It's already totally broken down. Like, you can't really appreciate the elasticity and the way that fascia actually operates and functions and responds to stimuli. And so what they're showing in this recent research is that the myofascial system is essentially the inner web of the body. It is the internet, literally. And it's constantly communicating. And like you're talking about, the cells and how do cells be able to communicate between each other, the same thing goes with the fascia. And what that's doing very much so, and it correlates with how much our hydration, what is our hydration level, and what is the quality of it, just like you said. So it's really, I think, a great segue. When we work with in the body, when I'm working on the table, part of getting us in the parasympathetic nervous system, taking, kind of these measurements, seeing where's the restriction, where's the contraction in the body, and also oftentimes that correlates to the emotional state. Where is there an emotional trauma? Where is there a psychological trauma in the body, in the psyche, which again is getting into that realm that's hard to quantify because it's in the unseen realm, but it's very much felt, literally, right? It is the feeling realm. And it is oftentimes, more than not, and there's different studies that have shown this correlation between, of course, the physical and the emotional state, right, of our beings. So the way we feel bad, we have a certain, traumatic thing, or we think about, we have a certain tendency to be very prone to injury, or constantly dwelling on death, for instance, or we're constantly worrying about getting cancer, and then we manifest cancer. In essence, placebo effect is essentially this, right? Which is statistically significant, which I always think is so funny, right? Placebo actually is medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. It really is interesting. But I mean, I think there's definitely more going on when I'm on that table beyond placebo.
Right.
And that's the other thing I want to make sure we get a chance to get this part in during our interview. The didgeridoo and all these musical instruments that you then blasted my body with. At this point, by the time you got, because you did like a lot of deep tissue work while I was there on the table, as you were blasting my body via the table with the music that you produce. And by the way, please remind yourself, if possible, what I'd like you to do, if you can, is send me like a track that I can embed in the podcast show notes so people can hear the type of music you'd play during the massage. And I'll put that in the show notes, or we could even at the end of this podcast, because I've got an audio ninja who can pull this off. If I have your permission, we could even like play one of your songs at the very end of the podcast so people could see what it sounds like.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you'd be game to do that, but just send me the track you want to play and I'll get it in. So if you're listening in right now, we'll play some music at the end of this show. But then you break out all these instruments. Talk to me about what it is that you're then proceeding to blast the body with and why you choose these particular instruments to use.
Sure. Blast is a great term.
Yeah.
The idea is, for me, is, so again, vibration. So with the body, it's like what we're doing is essentially a very gross form of vibration, and gross in the sense of, general, more, on a larger scale. And what my goal is essentially to get the vibration and bring vibration into the body on more and more nuanced ways. Like, how do we get to the most subtle vibration? So kind of from the most, not so subtle to the most subtle. And so throughout the session, essentially that's what we're working with. So getting you into that parasympathetic state, getting you to basically entrain. There's also a level of entrainment going on, which is also a really fascinating, thing about nature, is this notion of entrainment, and how, certain things, when there's a stronger pulse or stronger rhythm, again, connecting to that notion of rhythm or cyclical pattern happening, other things around it will tend to gravitate towards that. And you see that everywhere from when women come together, when multiple women are in the same proximate space with each other, their moon cycles will sync up. Their menstrual period will sync together, which is a really fascinating way. Same thing goes with, you go into a club and it's pounding this bass, 120 BPM music, your heart rate's going to start to accelerate up. It's really interesting thing. And conversely, if you hear a slower pulsing music, you'll start to entrain into that frequency as well. And we see this also with different brain states, brainwave states, with like alpha versus theta. And there's a whole area that we could, haven't even tapped into, which we could talk about too, is binaural beats, and kind of looking at that, which is one segment of sound healing that a lot of people talk about. I tend to not use it as much in the sessions because I want to do binaural beats really with the human body. You need headphones, and I'm working too much, on the body itself. So anyhow, back to blasting with the didge. So essentially, we get the body into the state where it's really dropped in and it's wide open. And that's our goal, is really releasing everything. And so the myofascial work essentially is we're opening that space in your connective tissue, unlocking that space, using your breath essentially as a gateway, as essentially as the vehicle, if you will, for taking whatever's been stuck, wherever we saw the density in the body, and helping to make that density less and less. We want to, basically reduce the density in the body, allow it to be as open, activating all your channels, your meridians, your energy centers of your body, as well as the physical. And then once we get you into that state where you're wide open, then essentially it's time to have fun. It's time to really then see, how can we now bring these subtle vibrations? So that's where it comes into the tuning forks, which we were talking about a little bit. And the didgeridoo is an instrument that I feel is one of the most powerful instruments that I've ever been able to come in contact with, out of everything I've ever studied or traveled and experienced. And the reason being is I feel there's something to it being such a primordial sound. The didge is an instrument that is arguably the second oldest instrument after the human voice. As far as a physical instrument, it's, the Aboriginal people of Australia were are coined as having the original didgeridoo as being the first people to know the didge, and they are the oldest living beings on earth that we know of, and constant culture still existing to this day. And the didge has been used by them to enter into what they call the dream state, to go in, to connect with source, to connect with creator, with the mystery, with the void. And essentially, the didge does this in a very powerful way, and that is by tapping into the breath. Once again, the breath that we've been working with throughout is the diaphragm breathing. You cannot play the didgeridoo without tapping to that diaphragm breathing. So it as much as it's powerful medicine to receive, it's also medicine to play it. And so I always encourage listeners, really, if you can, it's very easy. Just get yourself a didge and make yourself one out of PVC. There's even one, I think you can YouTube Hoovery-Doo and watch a really funny video of someone doing it on a Hoover vacuum cleaner, with just like the end of the vacuum cleaner, because you just need a basically a pipe.
My mouth isn't going anywhere near our vacuum cleaner. I'll tell you that right now.
I don't recommend that. Actually. But a PVC pipe, for instance, which you can get at any hardware store, about 1.5 inches diameter and about the length of, say, 50 centimeters or so, will get you into approximate like key of C or so. And you can get different keys by the length of it, which is arbitrary at this point. This what you want, and then just get some beeswax. You melt that, you dip it into the beeswax, and you've got yourself a didge. You make your mouthpiece with that, and then essentially making the sound itself, even if you don't get the actual technique of circular breathing or spiral breathing, is what I like to call it. You're already going to start to activate the fascia in your throat and strengthen the epiglottis. You start to actually strengthen your diaphragm and start to cultivate that breathing from the core, which is undoing this patterning that Ben and I are talking about here. So I really tell people, like, get yourself a didge, and even if you don't think you're musical or whatever the story may be, start to practice, because by doing so, and there's actually been clinical studies on this. Actually, a study came out of the UK, I think it was in 2012, and I can send you the link afterwards, but it actually showed that people suffering from sleep apnea were able to actually reduce and reverse, some people even reverse sleep apnea using and practicing training essentially with the didgeridoo.
They do. It
which
teaches
is incredible.
You how to circular breathe.
Yeah.
And do this deep diaphragmatic breathing. The other thing, by the way, somebody showed me this. I haven't bought it yet because I'm still, I figure until I get to the point where I can regularly use my harmonica when I travel, which is what I'm working on because it's far easier to carry through the airports than my ukulele. And then once I get that down, I'll switch to this. But they make like a compact travel didgeridoo. You can just get off of Amazon. It's like this cool little like mahogany wood travel didgeridoo that does the same thing. You use it for meditation or deep circular breathing or anything like that. I was thinking about getting a couple for my kids to play around with.
Absolutely. No, and they're like a little box, and they fit like in your backpack or your carry-on. I really recommend it. And literally, so coming back to, as you play it, of course, it's doing all kinds of stuff within ourselves, which I can speak to more in a second. But as far as for the person listening, right? So for you, for instance, as I'm working on the table, the didge that I work with is tuned to a frequency that some people call the ohm frequency or the earth frequency. You know, it's in a C, but it's slightly out of C. So it's in a relationship to what's called 432A. So essentially A, you know, the pitch that we know is like concert A, if you will, which is a convention, that pitch being 440 hertz, which is how many cycles, you know, that it's oscillating at. That's basically a convention that was created because of classical music, and it was adopted early on in the West. There's many other pitch, you know, kind of ways to pitch instruments. Now 432 is a very interesting one. So essentially, instead of tuning your A to 440, essentially what that means on an instrument, you tune it down to 432. And then you base all your other notes off of that 432A. So mine was in a C using 432, if that makes sense.
It does. I did a whole podcast, by the way, with a guy named Michael Tyrell, a composer named Michael Tyrell, about this. And we even went into how to get a digital tuner if you happen to be an instrumentician or musician, and how to, I made up that word just by the way, instrumentation, nice. And how to actually tune your instruments to the proper frequencies. So yeah, I've addressed that on a podcast before. It's fascinating.
Awesome. It's a fascinating whole area of study, and people really get deep into it. So I'll let people listen to that podcast. But essentially, I use the didge with this tuning, and I also have my bowl. One of the bowls that I work with is also in this tuning, and so between the two, essentially the whole table, as you felt, you know, resonates with this primordial instrument. And essentially what I really find powerful with the didge when you're receiving it, when you're as the listener, is it starts to basically clear energetic blocks. And I know that's a big claim to make, and without having a way to really quantify that, of course, especially if we're, talking from a scientific perspective. But I literally, in numerous occasions, have seen it just clear stuff out of the way, for lack of a better way to express it. Kind of just removing the obstacles, if you will, and helping the client or the patient or whoever it is in the space just feel more dropped in and more relaxed in that way. And it creates this almost like the Om, if you will, when you kind of like Om to yourself. It creates this primordial sound, this sound that's so ancient and speaks to something I feel that is on a cellular like memory level, like an ancestral sound that I feel has been throughout all of us across the ages. And it's something that it's kind of like I said, it gets a little, I know, fringe to talk about it that way, but it's kind of like I don't want to shy away from it because there's really some medicine there. And all I can say is for all of you diehard scientists out there, play it. And if nothing else, enjoy the peculiarity you might feel from it, and notice what happens for you when you listen to it, and when you put it on through headphones and when you can be in the sound, especially on the sound table that we're working with, because it really does change things. And so that's a tool that I feel is indispensable for my work, and it's also a tool that I use in my performances. When I play on a big stage, I tell you what, I've been in a club or a bar where people are drinking and the vibe is super low and heavy. And when I pull out a didgeridoo and play it through a subsystem, through the whole PA system, like a freaking powerful system, nobody knows what hit them. Like the whole place will shift. The energy in the room literally just like it goes up an octave. Wow. And it's a really energetically. And I can't say it enough. I think it's a really powerful tool that we're so blessed that the Aboriginal people allow us to use, because, traditionally it was used only by men in ceremony, out of the public eye. And it's a more recent phenomenon that it's been now spreading across the world. Say that, the didge isn't unique to the Aboriginal people. There is a lot of evidence actually that the Mayans had a form of didgeridoo. It was made out of other materials like bamboo, and also using gourds. The Aztecas also had this. So there's a lot of pre-Columbian instruments that have a similar nature. So I feel that, and of course you have the giant horns that the Tibetans play. There's other places where we see this use of circular breathing and this use of a horn kind of instrument.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, and I know we're running up against time. There's like so much we could talk. We got like halfway through the massage session that I did with you, but we did. I know we may have to do a part 2 here, but we did. You did the gong and you did the healing bowls, and honestly, I by the time we got done. And then I wanted to integrate. I wanted to just lay there for like 2 hours, but I had to drive back I think I was flying out of the Phoenix airport like a couple hours later. So I literally just swung.
I'm so sorry.
I swung into Chocolatry in Sedona and just took off. But what I did want to tell people is I'm going to play some of your music at the end of this show so folks can learn a little bit more about what it is. And I mean, if you're freaking anywhere ever near Sedona, the trails, the majestic red rock views and the crystals, everything, like Sedona is just a magical place. You got to go to that Chocolatry restaurant as well. That place is pretty good too.
Yeah. They're amazing.
Yeah. Anyways, though, you need to drop in and try one of these Myorhythmic releases with Porangui. I mean, it's amazing. It really is. Tell me about I want to make sure I mention this too. You do like retreats as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we do intensive experiences with people, from all over the world. Basically, come with us, and the retreats are also in different parts of the world. Oftentimes in Sedona, I know you've also had a session with Anahata. Her and I are doing a retreat. Yeah, we're doing one coming up here in April. Actually, it's already booked up, but there's going to be another one, coming up soon. So people just reach out to us. We'll let them know. But we're also doing, we do a lot with ecstatic dance retreats where we do a lot of movement and intentional kind of like teaching us how to be able to move our bodies and how to actually move emotional states through. Yeah. And
I was
really
doing that. I dance now sometimes in the mornings with my kids. We'll put on either electronic dance or Disney tunes or whatever. And dance is amazing. You know what I think we should do, because by the time this podcast gets released, I will also have released a podcast that I did with Anahata. And, I mentioned Aubrey earlier. I think we should get together together like a Ben Greenfield crowd and come down there and just put together a retreat for all of our listeners who want to join in and do ecstatic dance and give people the opportunity to see what you do and maybe go see Anahata. I should talk to Aubrey about maybe doing something out there at the Spirit Ranch. So
absolutely,
if you guys are listening in, tell you what, go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/soundhealing. If you're interested in me putting together some kind of a retreat with Porangui and Anahata and Aubrey, and I'll bring a group down to Sedona and we'll put something on this year, just pipe in there in the comments and we'll make something happen. So Porangui, like I mentioned, I feel like we delved into like about half of what you do and what I experienced, but we're literally I'm opening the kimono. I'm already a couple of minutes late for another call that I have to get on. So
sorry. Okay.
Anyways, you bastard. You just enchant me for too long. So what I'd like to do is, folks, if you have questions or comments for Porangui, or you want to visit the website or see a little bit more of what he does, or listen to previous podcast episodes I've done on sound healing, just go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/soundhealing, and I'll link to his website where you can read more about how he combines a lot of these indigenous medicine practices with sound healing tools. And again, if you get a chance to just fly into Sedona and drive out there, or fly into Phoenix and drive out there to Sedona, well worth it. Just spend a couple days out there, visit Anahata and visit Porangui and try out this interesting corner of the world. And Porangui, I'm going to be in touch with you. You got to send me the music that I can play at the end of this episode, and I'll play you guys one of Porangui's tunes. And then stay tuned for more if you're listening in, because I really think that it would be a lot of fun to put together a little retreat for all the listeners down there to delve into some of the things that I've experienced in Sedona. So in the meantime, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, and if anyone would like to experience, any of the work that we're doing, whether it's the retreats or performance, we're touring. I'm touring all over the country. I'm actually going to be in Europe this summer, doing several festivals. So we're always going. We just got back from Hawaii. We're in Austin now, so please jump on our email list too over on my website, porangui.com, and you can just sign up there and we'll let you know. We also send some music out that way. New albums also on the horizon right now. I'm working on, as literally in between all these trips, finishing up. So I'm really excited to share that with the world shortly. And we're going to be creating then a Patreon platform as well, which so many people have been asking for more content and other ways to learn more from what we're doing. So if people are interested in that, please let us know that too. And I'll be posting that as well.
Awesome. That sounds great. All right, folks, we'll go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/soundhealing. I'll put links to everything. Again, leave your comments if you're interested in me putting together a retreat. And in the meantime, Porangui, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all this stuff with us, man.
Yeah, you got it, Ben. Thank you so much for having me, brother.
Awesome, folks. Well, until next time, I'm Ben Greenfield, along with Porangui from Sedona, Arizona, signing out from bengreenfieldfitness.com. Have an amazing week.